Serious, what's the creepiest true story that happened to you or someone you know? When I was younger, my dad was out of town and my mom let me have a few friends over. We lived right by a pretty busy highway, and over the years had quite a few people knock on our door for help. Car broke down, lost, accident, etc. While my mom was home with us, a man knocked saying he wanted to borrow the phone. My mother told him he could sit on the porch and use her cell phone. The man kept asking to come inside and asking if my dad was home. He eventually started trying to force his way inside. My mom slammed and locked the door, called 911, and put my friends and I into a closet. It took the police department 20+ minutes to reach us. By that time my mom had called a neighbor, and he came over his shotgun and made the guy lay on the ground until the police arrived. TL. Drug guy tries to break in. Mom saves me and my friends, and badass redneck neighbor points shotgun at him until police arrive. This happened to a friend of mine. It's a Sunday. She comes home to her apartment from running errands around 1 PM. She was in med school at this time, so she pretty much parked herself at the kitchen table and studied for the next 5 to 6 hours. She's sitting there and looks up to see a dude casually stroll out of her bedroom. No other entrances. She's sitting by the front door, so has been there the entire time she has been home. He pauses at the doorway to her kitchen. Between her and the door, she basically froze. Then her phone rang and kind of startled both of them. She ran to get the phone. He ran out the door. She moved and got an enormous dog. He was in her apartment the whole time. This is one of my biggest fears. There used to be billboards for anti-drunk driving campaigns that would show a picture of a happy family or whatever, and then let you know they were all killed by drunk drivers. When I was about 16, I saw my own face on one of those signs. It was a picture of myself, my little brother, and my 2 childhood friends that lived next door to me when I was in 1st grade. So, maybe I'm dead. One of these billboards was right by my work, so I had to look at it every day. After telling my mom about it, she said the father of the kids next door was a photographer. Ed just moved into a basement suite. Every time I went out I would lock the deadbolt, but not the door handle. But when I came home a lot of the time the deadbolt would be unlocked and the door handle would be locked. At first I thought I was just confused about which one I had locked, so I started paying more attention. It kept happening and I realized someone must be going in. When I went out, I assumed it was the landlady and was annoyed, but didn't say anything at first. Then one day I came home and found the wrong lock locked again. I went in pissed off and opened the fridge to get something to eat. There was a book in the fridge that I had never seen before. I collected old books and this one was published in the early 1900s, which creeped me out completely because it was like it had been left for me. I finally called my landlady and asked if she was going into my apartment and told her what had happened. She freaked right out, said the last person who lived there was a really creepy guy with mental health and drug problems. She got all the locks changed that day and it never happened again. When I was about 14, my parents left me alone overnight for the first time. I grew up in a small farming community, so my parents really had nothing to worry about. They left and I decided to take an awesome bubble bath and paint my nails like all girls everywhere, obviously. While I was in the bath, I heard our back door up. I thought I was hearing things, and besides, I had locked all the doors per my mom's orders. But then I heard the kitchen floor squeaky spot. I didn't know what to do, so I just went under the bubbles and left my head out. I saw 2 shoes through the crack between the door and the floor. I could hear a person breathing. They stood there for about 30 seconds and then walked away. I heard the door slam, but I didn't move. I just stayed there until the water was freezing and cried. Then I got out, called my grandma, and checked the doors. The back door was unlocked and the lock hadn't been messed with or broke. Later that week we learned that a man was breaking into farmhouses. Don't know anything super creepy, but my friend just told me about what happened to his cousin the other day. Apparently his cousin lives in a really small town near / in some woods, his house being surrounded by trees. This happened at night. He gets up to go to the bathroom. Before he got there he noticed someone standing outside his front door. Just standing there, motionless, staring. He decides to open the door to confront the man and gets slashed from the top of his forehead across his eye, ending as his jaw. The mysterious man then ran off and disappeared. The police still haven't caught him after they had filed the report. Luckily it didn't cut deep enough through the eyelid to get to his eye. He's also even more lucky that he happened to need to use the bathroom at the perfect time. Otherwise, who knew what this person would have done had he been left alone. Back in the 70s, my grandfather dropped my grandmother, mom, and her 2 sisters off to do some shopping on his way to work. Since he wasn't able to pick them up, they hitchhiked home. My mom at the time was only around 10 or 11. Middle sister would have been about 7 or 8 and the youngest was about a year old. They get picked up by a guy in pickup truck who has them all sit in the back row with one of them holding the baby. My grandmother was giving directions to their home from the highway, but the guy ignored her and went by their exit claiming he had to make a stop first. Didn't really say much else to them during the drive. My mom remembers my grandmother being very quiet and very nervous. Eventually they come up to a farm. Driver tells them to wait in the car and goes inside the house. While he's gone they just sit there terrified. They're in the middle of nowhere and know they couldn't make it out on foot. A few minutes later the driver comes out with a second guy who looks into truck and sees my mom's youngest sister. He starts flipping out, screaming at the driver that he shouldn't have brought the baby back. They aren't going to do anything with her and some other things I can't remember. Ends up telling him to get them away from the farm. Driver gets back into the truck, apologizes, and they get back on the highway and drive again in silence. My grandmother, normally a very smart woman, had him drive directly to their house, although I suspect her reasoning was she'd already given him the address before anything seemed off. They lived at that house for several years and luckily never saw either of them a second time. TL. Dr. A baby saved my grandma and her kids from being raped. My family were driving on the rural main road of Poland, were Polish, and next to our car was this truck delivering large concrete pipes. We drove next to this truck for maybe an hour, maybe 2. I was a teenager, so I didn't really care. My dad figures we stop at the next gas station for a quick toilet break. As I exit the car, a pair of bikes drive past the gas station. I notice because it was loud as frick. PP over, and we go back on the road. About a mile or so down the road there's an accident. The bikes had caught up with the truck, and as they were about to drive past it the large concrete pipes fell off the truck and smushed the bikers. Maybe they weren't fastened properly, or the truck swerved. I'm not sure, but they were dead. Blood everywhere. I still have a hard time thinking of what could have happened. TL. Doctor survived some real Final Destination shoot. When I was about 9 or 10, my older brother and I had a few friends over to stay the night. My dad had to work the next day, so we were all left at the house by ourselves for the day. We were excited to play PlayStation all day on our Saturday off. Well, my dad worked late that night until probably 8 or 9. As soon as the sun went down we went into one of the rooms upstairs to play Uno. Fast forward 30 minutes and we start hearing footsteps slowing walking up the wooden stairs. My dad wasn't going to be home for another 2 hours, so we didn't know who it was. There were 4 of us, me, my brother, my friend, and his friend. We would take turns walking out of the room to see what it was, but before we could look down the dark stairs we would hear what sounded like someone running down the stairs as fast as they could. So they couldn't BSE. This continued for probably 2 hours, ending with all of us huddled in the room upstairs with the door wedged shut with a chair until my dad got home. None of us were really believers in anything paranormal, but a child's imagination is a crazy thing. Now 15 years later, I still don't know what to make of it, but every one of us heard those footsteps walking up those dark stairs. I bring it up to my friend who I'm still friends with, and he remembers it just as vividly as I do. It kind of creeps me out just thinking about it. Once as a teenager, I was leaving a fast food drive-thru and someone in an old Bronco started to follow me. At first I thought it was a road rage situation and did the sorry wave and tried to let him pass, but he swerved at me like he was trying to hit my car. He pulled up alongside of me and was screaming out the window, just incoherently furious, continuing to swerve at me. This was before the days of cell phones, and I was in an unfamiliar area of town. I was driving a Firebird and tried to outrun him, but he would run red lights and make crazy turns to keep up with me. I eventually ran into a dead end and he pulled his truck across the road to block it. There were big ditches on either side, so I was stuck. He got out and started scrambling at my door handle, doors locked, and pounding on the windows, his face inches from mine, just screaming and screaming in a way that seemed like he couldn't even quite see me. Shaking and crying, I turned on my overhead light so he could see I was just a teenage girl and not who he was looking for, and he jumped on my hood and started pounding and drooling and thick white smears on my windshield. I was screaming and crying and he stopped, held up one finger like wait a minute, and scurried off to his truck. I floored the gas and ran into the ditch and drove like a crazy person for 45 minutes until I knew I had lost him. No idea what his deal was. My mom thought I made up this entire story to lie about the damage to my car and still seems hesitant to believe me. When I was a child, I was always stricken by this irrational fear that when I went outside at night, I had to walk straight into the house without looking back, because if I looked back, someone would be following me. One day after dinner I went out to the car to get my book bag, and I was continuing my ritual of walking straight inside without looking back, adrenaline pumping, anxiety going full force, and I just stopped and said to myself, this is stupid. I made myself look back. When I looked back I saw what appeared to be someone crouched down behind my mom's car and was peeking their head around. They were just staring at me and smiling. It appeared to be a woman in her mid-30s, maybe 40, with curly short blonde hair. We made eye contact for a second and then she ducked back behind the car where I couldn't see her. I stood frozen for a second and then ran inside. I told my mom. We went outside to check. No one was there. My mom didn't exactly not believe me, but she wasn't very concerned either. This story certainly felt creepy when it was happening. I was in the orthopedic surgery wing of the hospital after getting my torn Achilles tendon repaired. It was a fairly long procedure, and I was pretty groggy from the anesthesia after effects combined with the morphine for the pain. But I did notice that I had a roommate that had both of his hands and feet wrapped in bandages. I could hear him talking to his father, but didn't pay much attention because of how out of it I was at the time. I did remember hearing something about why did you stop taking your medication. I don't know how morphine affects anyone else, but it gives me a very restless sleep combined with vivid dreams, almost nightmares, something I never have. So in the middle of the night, while turning over for the 100th time, I spied someone standing beside my bed in the dark. Do you have any smokes? My roommate apparently was standing there watching me sleep, waiting for me to wake up to ask for a cigarette. It could be considered being very polite or very creepy, but when you are in a morphine-induced haze it was definitely creepy. Later that day I heard the details of why he was there. He had gone off his meds and decided to quit smoking hardcore. I mean liquid nitrogen cold turkey. First he nailed his feet to the floor so he couldn't go out for smokes. Then he took a butcher knife from the kitchen and cut off the fingers of his left hand so he couldn't hold a cigarette. That's where his plan kind of fell apart, because he had a lot of trouble cutting off the right fingers with no left fingers to hold the knife. He only got those 3 of them. I put this together between the conversations I overheard between family, nurses, and doctors. I was supposed to be in there for another day, but they told me I could go home early if I was okay with taking Tylenol 3 for the pain. I would have to stay if I needed the stronger morphine painkiller, so the staff could administer it. I said I would go home with aspirin if it meant getting out of that room. The head nurse at the nursing station was sympathetic. She said the guy really needed to be in a different kind of hospital, but he had orthopedic issues that had to be dealt with, and that's why he was there. It wasn't supernatural, just a mentally disturbed individual who had hurt himself. He probably couldn't even have hurt anyone else considering his injuries, but in my morphine fog it was creepy as hell to me to have someone that disturbed 10 feet away while I was sleeping. When my wife was in college, she took a philosophy class or something. On the first day everyone announced who they were, etc. Turns out she was sitting next to a police officer who was taking the class for continuing education or a promotion, can't remember, but he was actively a police officer. This was really great for her because she's small and it was a nighttime class. They became friends-ish as much as two people sitting next to each other for a few classes. He agreed to walk her to her car after class since the school wasn't in the best area and it made her feel safe. Around midterms he stops showing up. She's kind of confused, but figured life happens and something else probably came up. A few weeks later we're at her parents' house and her mom asks if we had heard about the police officer that had been arrested. We hadn't, so she begins to fill us in on this police officer that had been pulling women over and raping them in their cars. We live in a small town, but it gets super rural super fast if you leave, so nobody is passing these scenes as they're happening. Anyway, turns out that the officer raping women was the same guy that was walking her to her car after class every week, and the reason he wasn't in class was because he had been arrested. My babysitter was killed back in the mid-80s when I was about 6 to 7 years old. They found her body in a garbage bag near a dept store and never found the killer. No one knew anything about it. No witnesses, no clues, and this was a smaller city of about 50k people. So when a crime happens, word travels fast. One night around 10 or 11, when I was around 16 to 17, me, my two brothers, my parents and our 4 friends, we sitting around watching ghost stories on TV. The living room was pretty packed, and it was stationed right beside the main entry of the house. Someone knocked on the door, so my stepdad went to answer it. There were 2 big built guys and they were asking to use the phone. My stepdad was taking a bit long talking to them, so my mother went out to the door to see what was going on. Then we all hear there's only 2 of them, and they hit my stepdad and run in. I would think to rob the place, but when they come into the house instantly see 6-7, 17, 18-year-olds staring at them. We all get up, and they bolt out of the house scared shitless. Had we not been there, my parents would have been in serious trouble. When I was around 14 years old, I really liked to go for runs with my Shepherd X-Lab. I lived in a fairly quiet, clean suburban neighborhood that was situated beside a broad expanse of pasture used by about 10 horses. I would say it was roughly 40 acres. Anyway, a bike path ran between the pasture and my neighborhood, and I generally ran down the path. One night I decided to go with my pup around 10 p.m. May not seem like the smartest decision, but I had spent many nights with my group of friends biking/rollerblading around the neighborhood, so I thought nothing of the late hour. I was running down the bike path with my dog, who is a big pup, yet the friendliest guy you'll meet. As we ran, I noticed a dark limp a little ways ahead, and because it was nearly pitch black I could barely see it. I dismissed it as a garbage bag. As we drew closer, my dog perked up his ears and his hackles went up, and he started to growl. Which he rarely ever does. He loves basically everything. I stopped running and stared as the garbage bag started to move. 14-year-old me still didn't really know what the heck I was looking at, and it wasn't until the supposed garbage stood up that I realized it was a man, who then started to run towards us. My dog then turned around and, I kid you not, started to run and yanked me along behind him. We reached a street. He darted down it, then pulled me into a dark alley, onto another street, then another alley, then another street, until we somehow lost the guy. My dog saved my life. I'm pretty sure the guy may not have been an axe murderer, but it turns out some creepy ex-felon was arrested in our neighborhood about 2 days later. I love my dog 3. About 15 years ago, a bunch of friends went to Canton, Texas for their huge first Monday sale. The whole town turns into a flea market for the weekend. One booth had thousands of old photographs. The store was maybe 20x20 with tables loaded with old pics. Randomly walk up, grab one, and I'm staring into a picture of my oldest son in a military uniform from the Civil War era. Not that he sorta looked like my son, it was his identical twin. Even had the same expression on his face my son would have in pictures. Call my husband over, he looks and totally freaks out. I wanted to buy it, but he became so physically ill from looking at it. He said he couldn't even have it in the same car as him, much less at home. Several years ago I lived in a semi-underground basement apartment. Basically the house was just enough underground that the windows were just a couple of inches off the ground on the outside. So one night I'm washing dishes in the kitchen, which had a window to my left, which was up. I'm almost finished when a voice whispers, "Looking good there with the dishes." There was someone crouched down by the window on the outside who had been watching me for who knows how long. Unfortunately for Creep Boy, I was washing the knives, and as I turned he evidently got scared by the gigantic chef's knife I was brandishing in his general direction and he ran off. I hated that apartment. Eventually I tacked thick fabric over most of the windows to avoid having to watch people pee drunkenly on them. About 18 years ago my family was driving home from Disneyland and traffic was backed up for so long and police were walking from car to car looking under each one. Dad asks one of the officers what was happening and the officer said that a man jumped into traffic on the freeway and they can't locate the gentleman's head. I was walking home from the beach one day around noon and a guy driving down the street in a Ford Escape slows down and in slightly broken English asks me how much. I tell him to frick off and he tells me $200 for an hour. At this point I'm walking faster and his car is keeping pace with me. He crosses 2 lanes and parks in a driveway in front of me and opens his door and a passenger door opens as well. Another guy steps out and walks towards me. I start screaming my head off and cussing them out trying to draw attention on this busy street while fishing my knife out of my bag. I walked into the street and around the car, call my boyfriend and tell them it's the cops. I give my boyfriend their license plate number and almost run to his house because it was about a block away. They followed me for another minute and then drove past me really fast while calling me a freaking cunt. I was 16 at the time and I really wish I had called the cops because as an adult I'm 100% sure I was about to be kidnapped and raped. This is firsthand. I worked as the marketing director for a very large consumer electronics company in Canada. We routinely have execs from overseas visit. Went to pick up an exec at his hotel room. When he opened the door and saw my colleague and I, he let out the most horrible shriek and fainted. He told us that he saw a full-size dead man sticking to my shoulder weightlessly. Needless to say, I was distressed. I felt nothing and saw nothing. But I do know the guy looked right at me and screamed. Still sends chills down my spine thinking about it. A friend and I were coming home from the movies and there is a rural stretch of road about 20 minutes from my house. As we were driving down it, a car pulled out of what I thought at the time a dirt road that led into the woods. The car kind of crept up right behind my friend's car and then would slow down and move back a bit and then move back up right behind us. At some point the car turned their brights on, so we kind of just assumed it was a police car, so we started to slow down and pull off to the side, at which point I noticed it was not a police car, and as we were pulled off to the side this car also slows down and casually, as if they misjudged the distance between our cars, nudged into the back of my friend's car. So it was at that point we realized we should get back on the road and towards a more populated part of the city. So this cat and mouse chase continues on through our city for another 20 minutes. At this point my friend, not altogether a small guy, nor lacking a temper, decides that has had enough, and so he pulls into a random driveway and turns the car off and immediately jumps out of the car. I reluctantly got out of the car a few seconds after him, and the car just slows to a crawl on the road, turns off the brights, and we see into the car 4 teenagers, I'm assuming, stoned out of their gourd with the windows down blaring Scissor Sisters I Don't Feel Like Dancing. As they roll by we also realize the 3 passengers all have sock puppets that they are aggressively having dance along to the song. The transition from fear to absolute relief at the situation made me piss my pants and my friend has never let me forget that.